Field reports from the strange. This is Obscura Bureau.
The document contained a single line that would unravel everything. It wasn't a mistake or a misprint. This clause was intentional, buried deep within 37 pages of dense legal jargon. The air in the room grew thick with the scent of old paper and something else, a metallic tang, like copper, that clung to the back of the throat. From somewhere in the dark house came a new sound. Not the settling of old wood, but a deliberate, wet scratching against the interior of a wall. The clause granted permission, not for construction or access, but for something the signatory never could have imagined. His breath hitched, trapped in his chest as the reality of what he'd signed took hold. A primal dread, cold and absolute, seeping into his bones. The signature at the bottom wasn't just ink on paper. It felt like a seal, a final surrender to terms written in a language of pure consequence. And in the heavy silence that followed the scratching, a single whispered word seemed to breathe from the very walls. Agreed. It accelerates. What if the most profound act of love in your life was founded upon the most unspeakable atrocity imaginable? What if you uncovered the evidence not within a concealed journal or a cryptic note, but within your own formal legal adoption records? This is the story of Emma, the girl who unearthed her family's murderous covenant, a pact not just whispered in secret, but signed, sealed, and delivered by the state itself. To everyone in her Austin neighborhood, Emma Carter appeared to have the perfect life. Adopted as a newborn by David and Linda Carter, she was their long-awaited miracle. Home videos show birthdays and Christmases filled with laughter, a childhood that seemed charmed. But beneath this sunlit surface, something far darker was beginning to stir. Dr. David maintained his professional calm, a reassuring presence in his community. His wife Linda, a primary school teacher, filled their home with vibrant art and lively music. They never concealed that their daughter Emma was adopted. Instead, they celebrated it openly. This openness seemed to anchor their family in warmth and honesty. Every gotcha day, they recounted their long wait, their fervent prayers, and the moment the social worker placed her in their arms, their family, finally complete. Now a college senior, Emma sat at her childhood desk, the air in her old room tasting faintly of dust and aged paper. Before her rested an ornate keepsake box, its brass latch cool to her touch. The label, Emma's Story, was written in her mother's careful script. She had always felt secure, loved, unquestionably theirs. With a soft click, she lifted the lid. When a university genealogy project prompted her to look deeper, Emma wasn't searching for secrets, just curious about her biological roots. She asked her parents for her original adoption file. David and Linda exchanged a glance. It was a flicker of something Emma couldn't quite place. A silent, shared dread that soured the air. Was it worry? But they smiled, the expression not quite reaching their eyes. "Of course, sweetheart," Linda said, her voice carrying an odd metallic echo. "It's your history." The words hung in the air like a threat. They retrieved a thick, official-looking envelope from their fireproof safe, the lock clicking open with a hollow finality. At first, it was just bureaucracy paperwork waiting in the dark. The documents lay on her desk like secrets finally exhaled, each page whispering a piece of her past. A faint, dry scent of aged paper and ink hung in the still air as she scanned the records. She smiled at the tiny footprints, a fragile proof of a beginning she never knew. Dry language, stamped seals. Then, she found her biological mother's name, Chloe Dawson. A quick online search that night led to a series of old local news articles from a small town in Ohio. 23 years ago, Chloe Dawson, her husband Mark, and their 2-year-old son Jacob died in a devastating, accidental house fire. Medical reports revealed Chloe was in her 3rd trimester when the incident occurred. Paramedics performed an emergency cesarean section right there on the blood-soaked ground. Against all odds, the premature infant survived the traumatic delivery. That child was Emma. Emma's hand trembled as she clutched the article, a profound sorrow blooming in her chest for the family she never knew. The full, horrific tragedy was a reality she could never have fathomed. A cold, metallic scent seemed to cling to the paper as she read on, searching for the official documents. The adoption papers that bound her to the Carters felt heavy in her hands, the finality of it all settling like a weight. And that's when she saw it. Page 17, Clause 8b. Special provisions regarding biological family. The language was a labyrinth of legalese, but Emma, trained to parse complex texts, forced her eyes to trace the lines once more. The cold, sterile scent of old paper filled her nostrils as she read it again and again. This wasn't some boilerplate clause buried in fine print. It was a specific, notarized agreement between David and Linda Carter and the estate of Chloe Dawson. It bound them to a structured annual payment into a trust, a financial heartbeat that would pulse for 25 years. Each installment was a whisper from a grave that refused to stay silent. The payments were contingent on one disturbing condition: the permanent and uncontested severance of all familial ties. The money wasn't destined for a charity in Chloe's memory. It was bound for Chloe's only surviving relative, her younger brother, Emma's biological uncle, a man named Mike Dawson. She finds him online, and her breath catches at the images. He lives far away, in a different state. A damp, metallic scent seemed to cling to the very pixels of his photos. She printed the photograph, the mechanical whir of the printer, the only sound in the room. Why were her adoptive parents sending her biological uncle a small fortune? The legal phrase, severance of all familial ties, echoed in her mind. It felt less like a clause and more like a veiled threat, a quiet, final payoff. Her mind unwillingly pieced it together, the accidental fire that consumed her family, yet spared a pregnant stranger just long enough for a C-section in the ashes. Her seamless adoption by a wealthy, childless couple from another state, arranged with unsettling speed and the quiet annual payments to the only man who might have had a claim to her, or a reason to demand silence. Emma confronted her parents in the once cozy living room, her voice trembling as she held the document, the atmosphere now thick with ice. "Who is Mike Dawson?" she demanded, the name hanging in the heavy air, "and why have you been paying him for 23 years? The question landed with the force of a physical blow. Across the room, David visibly paled, his breath catching in his throat. A secret, buried for decades, had just cracked open, and the air itself seemed to grow damp with the weight of it. Linda's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp as the air grew heavy with unspoken truth. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Emma, it wasn't what you think." This was a private agreement. To help him move on, she continued, her voice trembling, and to avoid a messy legal battle. David forced calm into his voice, but the words carried a chilling finality. "It was a closed adoption, sweetheart. This kept it sealed shut, for your protection, for our family." But their eyes betrayed them. It was a rehearsed answer. The air grew heavy with the scent of old rock and damp earth. Linda's tears weren't born of guilt over a payoff, but the raw terror of being unmasked. Driven by a journalist's instinct and a daughter's dread, Emma races to Ohio. She tracks Mike Dawson to a quiet, modest life as a mechanic. Their confrontation begins in the stark, fluorescent glow of a greasy spoon diner. Mike Dawson sits across from Emma, his gaze fixed on her mother's eyes and her face, his expression a blend of anguish and weary acceptance. He spoke softly, the words heavy with years of dread. "I wondered if this day would come. You look just like her." Emma's voice cut through the quiet, sharp, and insistent. "The payments, Mike. From my parents." "Why?" Mike stared into his coffee, the dark liquid reflecting nothing back, before murmuring, "After the fire, I was a wreck. The Carters, your parents, were already at the hospital. They were waiting. They offered to take you, to give you a wonderful life. I was young, broke, and hollowed by grief. So in my broken state, I agreed. Then, a lawyer arrived at my door. He was their lawyer." He slid a document across the table. An annexure to the adoption, a private contract. They'd established a trust for me, with a substantial annual payment. Emma leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "In exchange for what?" Mike met her eyes, his own clouded with decades-old shame. "In exchange for me never, ever questioning the official report on the fire. In exchange for my signature on a statement claiming faulty wiring. In exchange for my permanent silence." Reality shifted on its axis as Emma's darkest suspicion solidified into a terrifying certainty. The air grew thick with the phantom scent of ozone and burnt wiring, a metallic taste coating her tongue. Her adoption hadn't been a merciful coincidence after tragedy. It was the calculated first move in a much larger, more sinister design. The tragedy served as the grim precondition for the adoption. Emma whispered into the heavy air, her voice barely a tremor. "You think they?" Mike Dawson's breath hitched as a solitary tear traced a path down his face. "I know they did." His next words carried the metallic scent of a long-buried truth. "Your dad, David, but he wasn't just a family doctor. He did a residency in emergency medicine. 25 years ago, right here in this very county, he knew every local first responder by name. He knew their procedures, their protocols, their every move, and that knowledge made him, and what happened next, uniquely terrifying. The official fire report mysteriously vanished, while the insurance payout for adoption facilitation costs was processed with unsettling speed. Flashback. Young David Carter stands alone in a sterile Ohio hospital corridor, the air thick with antiseptic and distant, muffled voices. Mike Dawson's voice cracks with a raw, trembling honesty. "I took the money out of weakness and fear. If they could orchestrate this to get a child, What horrors would they commit to keep her? I told myself we were safe, loved. I convinced myself that was enough. But as I returned to that beautiful home, something had shifted. The warmth I remembered was gone, replaced by a clinical stillness that smelled faintly of ozone and fresh paint. What once felt like a home now looked exactly like what it was. A carefully constructed set. The facade was flawless, a masterpiece of deception that made the truth waiting inside all the more terrible. The parents sat motionless in the living room, a tableau of normalcy that now felt like a carefully staged trap. The air grew dense and still, charged with the ozone scent of a storm that had not yet broken. In the doorway, Emma clutched the file, its weight a final anchor. The questions had already curdled into a cold, certain dread. Emma didn't call the police. Not yet. The pact she uncovered wasn't just in the documents. It was in every smile, every bedtime story, every "I love you" whispered in this house. Their faces tell the final chapter, a pact of twisted love, forged in damnation. The parents who raised her, who kissed her scraped knees and cheered her graduations, saw a happy young family as an obstacle, and they removed it all to get to her. Emma stares at Linda, whose silent weeping is the only sound in the heavy room. Then at David, whose calm facade finally splinters to reveal a profound, primal dread. Emma's voice is unnervingly calm, hollowed out by grief and betrayal. You didn't just adopt me, you commissioned me. So what would you do? The evidence is circumstantial, but the scent of ozone and rot now hangs in the air where family warmth once lived. The clause in the contract wasn't just ink on paper. It was a whisper of rot that clung to the air, a cold, damp truth that seeped through the floorboards of their childhood home. Each scheduled payment was a drop of freezing water, echoing in the silence of a house that had forgotten how to feel warm. His brother's testimony wasn't spoken. It was a palpable pressure, a sticky residue of betrayal that coated every memory they'd ever shared. And a final, unspoken question hung in the air, thick with the scent of ozone before a storm. Would you tear your world apart for a justice that would destroy the only parents you've ever known? Or would you live with the truth, a secret buried deeper than any family skeleton, knowing your very existence is the product of a perfect crime? Emma has the file. She has the truth. But some doors, once open, can never be closed. The adoption papers lay on the elegant living room rug, a final shot that should have bound them forever. Now just ink and paper between shattered lives. The heartbeat that had been thrumming through this story for 12 minutes stopped. Not a sound remained. Just the ghost of what that family had been moments before. In that perfect, hollow quiet, you could almost smell the ozone of shattered trust, feel the damp chill of irreversible truth settling into the very walls.